Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now I absolutely love finding these Dell OEM cards, and in today's one we're taking a look at this GTX 1080. You might be looking at this and thinking, didn't we look at this exact thing 6 months ago? Now if you were basing that purely on aesthetics and looks, then yes, this does look identical to the 1070 that we looked at 6 months ago, but this being the 1080 it should be a little better, especially in sort of mid 2023. Of course, with this Dell OEM 1080 we get the MSI Aero cooler, we also get that classic green PCB, and we have one single 8-pin connector. So if you're working with a slightly lower end or weaker power supply that's got one 8-pin connector and you want something that can handle all of your favourite games at 1080p, then this might be just what you're looking for. Now I managed to find one, or this one specifically, at the very low price of £135 here in the UK. It was up for £150, but I got a really good deal after I offered £135, and surprisingly the seller accepted. I think they were selling a few, so I don't really know, or I wouldn't like to think about the history of this thing, but it fired up just fine, the drivers installed, and I've been gaming with it for a couple of days now. It emits nothing more than a gentle hum when at idle, and in games it doesn't really get much louder than that. It's certainly quieter than the Founders Edition 1060 we looked at very recently. I do like these Dell OEM cards, but I do know that they split opinions, especially among you lot in the comments, as was proved by that 1070 before. But let's jump into a few titles and see how well the legendary Pascal 1080 holds up in 2023. Pascal, of course, being one of the best lineups that Nvidia ever produced, in my opinion. So we're starting with Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 with the Ultra preset. Nothing else has been changed here. I wasn't really sure what to do with the settings, but I thought, you know what, let's stick it at Ultra, see what happens, and hopefully this would pay off. Now jumping into the game, and the GTX 1080 very much lives up to its name in the fact that it is a 1080p card. Buying a GTX 1080 for 1080p makes the most sense these days. With Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 here, we were able to average 79 FPS with a 1% low of 57 and a 0.1% low of 50. Now I wasn't quite sure what to expect, but I am happy to see that it was very consistently sticking to at least 60 frames per second. A few little dips and drops here and there, most notably when I got wiped out and then we saw the kill cam, there was a little bit of a drop with performance, but that was basically it. That's responsible for those percentile lows there, but apart from that it held up very well. Fortnite, since its Unreal Engine 5 upgrade, has become a lot more demanding, but even so, with the medium preset here, we were able to maintain 100% resolution scaling. If you select the medium preset, it's going to default to a lower resolution, probably about 70 something percent, so I just dragged that up to 100%, and in the gameplay, again, it was a frame rate that hovered around the mid-70s. 74 was the average. Now this is a competitive online game, of course, so if you do want a higher frame rate than this, I would suggest going with lower settings, but medium is fine. I was able to remain competitive still. A couple of little dips and drops here and there, which is usual to be honest, but performance was pretty good, and the game still looked half decent with these settings as well. The 1080 came out in 2016 now, so it's getting on in years, but it is still very capable, especially at 1920 by 1080 in 2023. Now in Cyberpunk 2077, I distinctly remember this one getting about 59 frames per second on average with the 1070 Dell card that we tested half a year ago. So I went with the same settings here just out of interest, which was medium crowds, medium textures, and the medium preset. Now in gameplay, we actually saw 63 FPS on average, so as expected it did better than the OEM 1070 by a few frames. I think it maintained higher percentile lows as well, and as it has been so far, the card is still just sort of emitting a gentle but more audible hum. Cyberpunk looks great at these settings anyway, and if you want at least 60 FPS then medium is advisable. But you could also go with high and perhaps enable FSR if you wanted to without too much of a degradation in image quality. Personally, I always prefer native where possible, and so medium all the way here for a plus 60 average. Now with Red Dead Redemption 2, I normally go with the console quality settings, but I thought I might as well just stick the textures at ultra and go with high settings everywhere else, or custom high, I should say, because there were a few things that were either disabled or off. Geometry quality was maxed out and grass quality was set to 2 out of 10, which reflects the console quality settings, but when you're in game it still looks absolutely fantastic. And with these settings, as we jump into the game now, you'll see that we averaged over 60 FPS with ease. 71 was the average, with decent percentile lows, 58 and 54 respectively for the Dell 1080. Now this is boosting higher than the on-paper stated clock speed, which I believe is 1733 megahertz. You'll often see this exceeding 1800. That said, it will hit the low 80s in terms of temperature, not all the time, but sometimes. I imagine if you crank the settings up even higher, then you're more likely to see that. And when it gets to about 80 to 83, that boost clock will drop to the high 1700s. So bear that in mind, but it's nothing significant and it's nothing that affects the performance massively. This is of course the blower style card, so it does run hotter than a lot of the other aftermarket options, and I can imagine it was even warmer than this when it was inside the original Dell OEM system that it came with. Marvel Spider-Man Remastered next, 1080p, and I went with the high preset here. This is quite a CPU intensive one, but it does generally seem to be quite well optimized outside of that. Now very high settings will pretty much gobble up all of the VRAM. I saw that it was hitting 7.2, 7.3 gigs of our available 8 gigs GDDR5X. So high was definitely better. The frame rate shot up to 90 on average with a decent 1% low, which was still above 60, and a solid 54 FPS for that 0.1% figure. So when it comes to Marvel Spider-Man Remastered, high preset is definitely better, though you could choose very high if you wanted to and drop a few things down as you see fit. For Resident Evil 4 now, I know I've still got the demo. I think the game came out yesterday. I've yet to purchase it, but I certainly will at some point within the next couple of weeks. 1080p here with the prioritized graphics preset. I then turned a couple of options off just out of personal preference, and this was things like motion blur, depth of field. Apart from that though, everything else was untouched. Now this game looks absolutely fantastic. I said the other day I never had a chance to play the original on GameCube or PS2, but I'm so glad that this got a remake because I think it looks fantastic, and it finally gives me the chance to play through it with modern controls, which I'm really pleased about. Performance wise, it seems to run really nicely from this demo. I haven't seen any data yet that tells me how different the full game runs in comparison to this demo, but of course the full game is the full game. There's a lot more going on, different areas, so I imagine performance will differ a little bit. This village area might be, or I can imagine it's going to be very similar, but when I get the full game I'll have to look into that a little bit more. From what I see here though, the 1080 runs it really well with this prioritize graphics preset. Next up we have The Witcher 3 Next Gen at 1080p with custom ultra settings. All the old settings that used to be under post-processing with the previous gen update I've turned off here. They are all under the graphical settings these days. I said the other day when testing the 5700 XT that I thought that card ran it really well, better than any Nvidia counterpart, but it turns out that the update that this game got just improved performance. It improved the stutter and the percentile lows, at least for me. That definitely seems to be the case with most cards I've tried, including the 1080 here. This was able to run it with 94 FPS at ultra settings, and the percentile lows remained really solid as well. I was just taking a walk or a run through the city and the surrounding areas, and performance was really nice here. Next up, Hogwarts Legacy 1080p with a high preset. I turned the fog quality down to low because apparently this is quite a demanding setting, but nothing else was changed. TAA was also set to low, and any upscaling options were off, including FSR. So, in game, 65 FPS on average in this area here. The area surrounding Hogsmeade seems to be quite demanding, and so does the little town itself. Even so, we were able to hit 65 FPS on average. The percentile lows did leave a little bit to be desired, but I have noticed that this game still isn't that well optimized. It seems to just eat up all the RAM as well straight away. Whether it just needs that much or maybe it's just not quite perfect in terms of optimization yet, I don't know, but it does run at over 60 FPS with the old Dell 1080 here. So performance wise, it's pretty solid and I'm fairly happy with how it plays. Finally, we have Forza Horizon 5 1080p with the Ultra preset. Now, this one looks absolutely fantastic. Let's just run through the settings, of course, quickly. Ultra, nothing else changed. TAA was also enabled here. FSR was off, of course. If we jump into the game now, well, you'll see that at 1080p, over 60 FPS was easily achievable, over 70 in fact. With the 1080, you're going to find that a lot of the time it sits at around 60 to 80 frames per second if you use settings similar to what I've done today. I wouldn't say this is an ultra settings card these days for every single game, but it can certainly still manage that in a lot of titles, and if not, you can certainly set things to high. Never really seen the point in maxing everything completely out because a lot of the time the differences won't be noticeable between high and ultra, but it is up to you, of course, and the 1080 can still deliver decent frame rates, especially at this resolution. But there we go, the Dell GTX 1080 in all its glory. This old green beast still has what it takes to play some of your favourites. Let me know what you think of this card, especially the design of it, because I know opinions are mixed, but personally I really like how these look, and for the price I paid, I'm very happy with it indeed. I actually bought this to use in a budget build, and I'll be putting that together very soon along with a few other components. But as for this one, well, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, leave a dislike if you didn't. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.